Today we are at 108 Contemporary in downtown Tulsa in the Brady District, and we are looking at a new exhibition that opens today. It's called Overlap, and it features the work of two artists. One is Lindsay Ketterer Gates, and the other is Amanda Bradway. And Amanda has joined us today to walk through the gallery and talk about her work and the show. So welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, tell us a little bit about the title of the show, Overlap, and where that fits into your work and how it connects to Lindsay's.
Well, Lindsay's work kind of has the same element as mine in that she uses a lot of repetitive patterns and overlapping elements like metal and paper, and the way that they all blend together, I think, is why they chose the name, or why we chose the name Overlap, is all of our elements sort of blend together a little bit in their themes.
Right, and your work in this exhibition comes from a specific series called Rites of Passage. So tell me a little bit about that title.
Well, Rites of Passage is all about life, death, and rebirth. I'm specifically interested in how fear and trauma and struggle create us as unique individuals, and how if you can take the courage to become vulnerable and start addressing the negative aspects of yourself, how that can change you and regrow you in a way, in a positive way.
So the sort of transformative power of trauma and grief and things like that. That's fascinating. Well, let's look at a specific piece here. This one's called The Gilded Cage, and what we're looking at is three sort of geometrically designed cages that are suspended from the ceiling on gold chains. They each include, do we have feathers on two of them? Two feathers. And then what is the skull in the middle one?
That's a raccoon skull.
A raccoon skull, okay. And then they seem to be almost sort of dripping with gold and silver chains, a mix of stones, and are they bones?
They are. I believe they are coyote bones.
Okay. Okay. And where do you come by coyote bones?
There's a place in Oklahoma, in Del City actually, called the Museum of Osteology, and they just sort of sell them in their gift shop.
Oh, fascinating. And same thing for the feathers and the raccoon skull? That's where you can get those?
I don't think the feathers, but for sure all the skulls and bones I get primarily from their shop.
Okay. Right, and then the different chains. Do you make most of these, or do you buy these? Where do you?
I get these from an artist supply store, or an artist sort of salvage jewelry shop.
Okay.
She takes apart vintage pieces or pieces that are overstock and sort of resells them. So these come in big bags, and I've been meaning to use them in my own jewelry. So this is I started incorporating them into my artwork with this series.
So, although we don't really know the individual sort of histories of these different chains, we assume that because they're largely vintage, they have a long history. Several owners. They could have been connected to charms or lockets or something like that, but they have sort of a precious history on their own. And then that would fit in some ways with obviously the bones, the remnants of the animals, that they had a life and a history of their own as well. And then tell me about your use. We also have the mixing in of quartz. Is that correct? Are these different different pieces of quartz? And where do those come from?
So quartz is my favorite crystal, and I started digging for them in 2011 when I started sort of working with jewelry. It's a lot of fun. You just dig them straight out of the ground. We go to Arkansas twice a year to dig these crystals. And so every piece, there might have been maybe one or two that I had to purchase them, but most every piece, all the quartz comes from me digging, it comes from my digs in Arkansas,
Right. And then we have these geometric shapes of these cages, and the idea of a gilded cage. When I think of that turn of phrase, I think of a beautiful creature that's kept contained in some ways against their own will, or in circumstances that they created themselves, or something like that. So how do we apply that to these animals? Is this a reference to sort of the cage that they lived in, maybe not a literal cage, but the way that their life was, or is it just more of a general metaphor for life?
Well, this piece specifically was inspired by a story in the book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, and she talks about the wild woman aspect. So the meaning behind these cages is that sometimes in our lives, I'm sure all of us know someone who lives a seemingly perfect life. And they have everything they need, but they still seem so unhappy. So this piece is about sort of the pressures and expectation that we get from family, friends, our lovers maybe, to live a prescribed life. You know, say you grow up, you get out of high school, you're expected to go to college. From college, you're expected to get married. And after you get married, you know, you have to have a career and everything has to be A, B, C. And so, you know, as unique individuals, it's important for us to not just live these prescribed lives and cage ourselves in, but really ask ourselves in our heart, who are we and what makes us alive? So a cage is an automatic decision that is not weighed by the needs of an individual's heart longing.
Oh, that's beautiful. Is that a quote from the book?
No, that's a quote from my blog. I wrote
That's
a blog
fantastic.
about it. Thank you.
I love that. That's beautiful. That's really fantastic. And this is going to sound terribly fatalistic, but in some ways, this idea of these cages that these prescribed cages that we build for ourselves, in some ways, we're really sort of liberated through death from them, and also sort of equalized in death. So whatever your cage was, whatever burden you were carrying, whatever way that you thought you might have been trapped, you find release in through death. That sounds awful. I'm not going to go jump in front of a bus or anything right this minute,
Right.
but there is that sense of there comes a point where you are freed from those expectations. Well, let's move over and take a look at another piece. And this one, again, uses some of the same details, but or some of the same techniques, but it's really focuses on the skull of a bison. This one's called Into the Storm. And so tell me a little bit about this one. Specifically, I'm interested in the design on the forehead here, on the face.
I'm sort of obsessed with repetitive patterns and the sort of infinite amounts of possibilities for composition that you can create with them. So I just was looking at the symmetry of the skull and decided that it needed to create this shape, and I put the pattern down the middle.
And what is that made of?
It is brass.
Brass. That's really fantastic. I mean, it really does appear to be like feathers in some ways. And it's interesting because it sort of very much softens the very sort of hard exterior of the skull.
Right.
And that's, of course, a very sort of beautiful connection to a lot of Lindsay's work with, as we were talking about, sort of the overlap of materials and repetitive designs. And in this one, well, in both cases of the pieces we've looked at, this one raises up this idea of the abject, the idea that something sort of draws you in. It's familiar. It might at one point be sort of beautiful, but at the same time, it's slightly sort of horrifying.
Right.
And in this case, you've really sort of transformed these things, I think, to give them a lot of new life. But there still is that slightly sort of, oh my goodness, that was a living thing that had a life, that had a whole sort of history that goes with it. And tell me about the horns here. Are these more crystals up the horns?
Those are actually crystals that you can grow in your kitchen from borax.
Wow. Oh, that's fascinating. Okay, and then what have they been placed on? So are these?
Yeah, you just you boil the water and you mix it until all the crystals dissolve, and you've already placed your object that you want crystallized into the water.
Okay.
So it just kind of bonds. I think it bonds wherever the object is sort of facing up.
Okay. I love that. So it in doing it, it becomes just a sort of organic kind of growth along the way, which again sort of speaks to maybe the decay and the passage of time, but it's a way to kind of create that.
Right.
I think that's really fascinating. And then let's go over to really what is an absolutely sort of fascinating piece, so big. And how long did this take?
This piece took about a month and a half
Okay.
to build. I didn't really have a big enough studio to build it in, so I actually started working on my living room floor.
Yeah.
And then had to clear out the back room in my shop to finish it. It's about 10 by 14 feet.
Okay. And so we've got some of the same materials, but then the majority of the designs, this is all done in paper?
Yes, The backdrop is 2 different layers of paper with sort of some separate organic elements that we placed strategically. And then we draped chain and bones and crystals around it. And what this piece did is it pulled in at least one theme from each piece in the Rites of Passage series. So this is sort of the culmination of all the work in this body.
Right. Oh, and we should say too that this one's actually titled Rites of Passage. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. And so we have a lot of sort of floral designs, sort of leafy vegetation designs. And I love that because it brings back in this idea of kind of rebirth, regrowth, the sort of transformative power we see in spring, sort of evolving out of sort of the barrenness of winter. And are the papers, is it the same type of paper? It looks like, I couldn't tell if some of it looks sort of heavier and some of it's lighter.
It's about 6 different types of paper.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, one of the things that I'm interested in is as viewers come to this, and they're going to come for the first Friday, what are you interested in sort of their takeaway being from not only this body of work that you've done, but its connection to Lindsay's work as well?
Well, I'm interested. I've done art pretty much my whole life as a therapy, and so I am a huge proponent of art as a tool of healing and connecting us in our common humanity. And this series tells a specific story each piece has about a turning point in my life that was based off of a trauma or a vulnerability, an insecurity, or a fear. So I hope that viewers look at the work and sort of start taking a personal inventory of their own lives. What are the things that I'm tolerating in my life, the things I'm not happy with, or where are the fears and insecurities following me around every day? And is it time to maybe figure out a plan of action to sort of start eradicating those fears?
Right. So it's going to be a very sort of personal look for each individual viewer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking us around the gallery. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
And Overlap will be on view at 108 Contemporary until July 26th.